It took him just 43 minutes. 43 minutes to tear down 7 years of a carefully crafted public image. Just 43 minutes to reveal that the bartender-turned-congresswoman, who preached about supporting working families, had actually stiffed working people out of thousands of dollars. The same one who demanded climate sacrifices while spending $30,000 on Uber rides. Who claimed a trauma she never experienced and then fundraised millions based on that lie. And she walked into the Senate hearing ready for a fight. Little did she know, she was walking into an execution. The country lawyer from Louisiana never raised his voice. He didn't have to. He simply asked questions. Just simple questions. The kind of questions any working person might ask. And by the time he was done, her 14 million Instagram followers couldn't save her. The Senate Budget Committee hearing room felt heavy with the weight of institutional authority. Dark wood paneling, a raised dais for the senators, and a witness table positioned below them, almost like an altar for judgment. Cameras lined the back wall, their little red lights glowing like warning beacons. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez approached the witness table with the confidence of someone who had mastered the art of the viral moment. At just 35, she had gone from bartender to Congress in less than a decade, gathering 14 million Instagram followers along the way. She was wearing a tailored burgundy blazer, with her makeup perfectly done for the cameras. Members of the squad sat in the gallery, wearing AOC shirts to show their solidarity. The progressive media had filled the press section, ready to capture what they expected to be a star performance. Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana sat quietly at the committee table, methodically organizing a stack of manila folders. At 73, he, with his white hair slightly disheveled and reading glasses perched on his nose, he looked more like a grandfather getting ready to show vacation photos. But anyone who knew him recognized that posture. It was a predator arranging his tools before the hunt. The topic of the hearing seemed straightforward enough: fiscal reality and progressive policy proposals. But behind the scenes, Kennedy's staff had been digging for weeks, and the folders sitting in front of him contained the kind of ammunition that ends careers. "Ms. Ocasio-Cortez," Kennedy began, his Louisiana drawl stretching out the syllables like warm taffy, "I do appreciate you joining us today. I know you're a very busy young lady." "Thank you, Senator Kennedy," AOC replied, her voice filled with a practiced media warmth. "I'm always happy to discuss how we can build a more just economy." "Well, now that's good to hear. Real good." Kennedy adjusted his glasses and pulled out the first document, her congressional financial disclosure. "See, before we talk about building anything, I think we should first establish a baseline understanding of numbers. Now, I'm 73 years old. I was practicing law before you were born. I spent 17 years as Louisiana's state treasurer, managing billions of dollars. And I had to account for every single penny." He looked up from his papers with that mild, questioning expression that had already destroyed countless witnesses. "So, when I see numbers that don't quite add up, I tend to notice. And your numbers, young lady? Well, they've got me a bit puzzled." Kennedy then displayed her financial disclosure on the overhead screen. "According to these official documents you filed with the House, you earn $174,000 per year. That's a fine salary. Puts you in the top 10% of American earners. Nothing to sneeze at." He then pulled out a series of photographs. AOC getting into her Tesla, walking into her D.C. apartment building, and attending various events in designer clothes. "But you drive a $64,000 Tesla Model 3. That's about twice what the average American spends on their car. You live in a luxury apartment over in the Navy Yard neighborhood. It's a nice building, Has an infinity pool, I'm told, and you wear some mighty fine clothes to all those fancy events." Kennedy looked at her with an expression of genuine curiosity. "So, my simple question is, how do you afford all of that on your congressional salary?" AOC gave her well-rehearsed response about budgeting and making smart financial choices. Kennedy just nodded slowly, the way you might acknowledge someone who's explaining that the moon is made of cheese. "Well, I'm sure you're very fiscally responsible." "We'll come back to that." He opened a new folder and pulled out a photograph that had been seen all around the globe. It was AOC in her white Tax the Rich dress at the Met Gala, surrounded by celebrities and billionaires. "Now, I've never been to the Met Gala," Kennedy said conversationally. "Wasn't invited, I suppose. But I looked it up. $30,000 for just one ticket. That's more than half of what the median American household makes in a year, for one party." He let that sink in for a moment. "Your dress said tax the rich, which is a bold statement to make at a party full of billionaires, kind of like wearing a Go Vegan shirt to a steakhouse, as my grandson might say." A few people in the gallery chuckled. Kennedy's expression, however, remained pleasant. "So, but here's what really interests me about this photograph, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. It's not the dress, not the party, and not the billionaires." He then pulled out official documents from the House Ethics Committee. "You were investigated by the House Ethics Committee for your attendance at this event. And do you know what they discovered?" Kennedy stared right at her, his voice sharpening, even as he kept that slow, deliberate drawl. "You failed to pay the working people you owed." A hush fell over the room. OC's look of confidence wavered for just a moment. "Now, why don't we discuss those unpaid bills?" Kennedy then produced a stack of invoices, each one stamped in red with "overdue" or "sent to collections." He handled them with the gravity of a prosecutor presenting evidence in a murder trial. The House Ethics Committee's investigation into your attendance at the Met Gala was, shall we say, quite thorough. And they uncovered some rather interesting details. And allow me to walk you through them. He held up the very first invoice. "Patricia Davenport, a small business owner from Brooklyn, operates her own makeup service. She was the one who did your makeup for the Met Gala. She sent you an invoice totaling $344.85. This was back in September of 2021. Kennedy then looked up from the paper. Ms. Davenport sent you not one, not two, but 3 reminders. 3. She waited for 6 long months. In the end, she was left with no other choice. And she had to send the bill to a collections agency, marking it as extremely overdue. Do you have any idea what that does to the finances of a small business owner, young lady?" He didn't even pause for an answer. "It means that she struggled to pay her own bills, all while waiting for you to settle yours. This is a single mother raising 2 children. Now, $344 might not sound like much to someone attending $30,000 parties, but for her, that's a month's worth of groceries." And Kennedy set that invoice aside and picked up the next one. Then we have the hairstylist, $477.73. It took you almost a full year to pay this bill. The stylist was forced to send a letter directly to your staff. Kennedy began to read from it, slowly and deliberately. "It would look terrible if we had to file a complaint with the New York Department of Labor against Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. That is a direct threat of filing a labor violation against you. The very same congresswoman who talks so much about protecting workers." And another invoice. The Hotel Carlyle for $4,062.92. Waited 8 months. 8 months. Those hotel workers, the housekeepers, the front desk staff, the kitchen workers. They all waited to be paid while you were posting on Instagram about fighting for working families. Kennedy methodically stacked the invoices, adding the dress rental for $990, which was also months overdue. He did the math on a notepad, writing the numbers large enough for the cameras to see. A total of $6,413 went unpaid to working people, all while you drove your $64,000 car, while you lived in your luxury apartment, and while you became one of the most famous members of Congress. Kennedy took off his glasses and looked at AOC with an expression that could only be described as disappointment. "Young lady, you talk a big game about fighting for working families. You give speeches about economic justice. But when the very working people who served you, who made you look good for your big, fancy party, asked you to pay them, you simply ignored them. For months on end, some of them even had to threaten legal action just to get the money they were owed." He paused then, letting the silence hang in the air. "Now, I may just be a country lawyer from Louisiana, but where I'm from, we have a word for that. Hypocrisy." AOC attempted to reply, mentioning staff errors and oversight. But Kennedy was already moving on to his next point. But the Met Gala is just a single example of the pattern I'm talking about. Let's take a broader look at your lifestyle. Kennedy then pulled out even more documents: property records, campaign finance reports, and photos from her own social media. Your Tesla, for instance, cost $64,000. That's double the price of the average car in America. How many working families in your own district do you think can afford that? And what about your Navy Yard apartment? I took the liberty of looking up the building. It starts at $2,500 a month, minimum. It has an infinity pool, a gym, and a rooftop terrace. Very nice indeed. Meanwhile, the average rent back in your Bronx district is $1,600, and most families are already struggling to pay even that. He then displayed photos taken from her Instagram account: designer clothes at various events, $1,000 blazers, high-end accessories, all while telling working people that they need to sacrifice more. Kennedy then revealed the most recent scandal: campaign finance disclosures from just a few weeks prior. And this one is fresh off the presses. December of 2024. Your campaign spending reports have just been released. You used campaign donations, money given by the very working people who believe in you, to stay at luxury hotels and dine at upscale restaurants during a trip to Puerto Rico. And he read directly from the report: 5-star accommodations, premium catering services, elite venues. Kennedy looked up again. The National Republican Congressional Committee called it, and I'm quoting here, peak hypocrisy from a walking scam. But Kennedy wasn't finished yet. And then, of course, there's your grandmother, your abuela. Do you remember when you posted those photos of her house in Puerto Rico, with its damaged roof and crumbling walls? You posted them as a way to attack Republicans, claiming they didn't care about Puerto Rico. Kennedy then displayed the very photos that AOC herself had posted. But here's the curious thing: you never actually offered her any help. You earn $174,000 a year. You drive a $64,000 car. Yet you couldn't spare a few $1,000s to fix your own grandmother's roof. And do you know who did end up fixing it? A group of conservative donors raised the money and did it for her. You strangers had to step in and help your own family because you refused to. You could hear the genuine bewilderment in Kennedy's voice. Young lady, where I come from, family comes first. You take care of your own. My mama raised me in Middletown, Louisiana. We didn't have much, but we always took care of each other. If her roof was leaking, I'd be up there fixing it myself, long before I'd ever buy a fancy car. He gathered the invoices and photos, arranging them into a neat stack. So, here's the pattern I'm seeing. You preach about working families, all while stiffing working people. You demand that others sacrifice while you get to live in luxury. You post all over social media about economic justice, yet you ignore your own grandmother's needs. You built a brand for yourself as someone from the working class, but the moment you got to Congress, you started living just like the elites you claim to oppose. Kennedy leaned back in his chair. But maybe I'm being unfair. After all, you're famous for your economic policy proposals. Let's talk about your signature achievement, the Green New Deal. Kennedy pulled out a 14-page document, holding it up like it was some kind of curiosity. February 2019, you introduced this resolution with Senator Ed Markey. The Green New Deal. You called it essential to save the planet. It got a lot of attention. It still gets talked about today. So, let's really discuss it. He opened it to the first page. 14 pages. That's it. 14 pages to restructure the entire American economy. Now, when I was state treasurer, our annual budget document was over 1,000 pages long. We had to account for every single dollar, every program, every contingency. But you figured you could remake America in just 14 pages. Kennedy pulled out an economic analysis. To the American Action Forum. That's a nonpartisan think tank. They studied your plan. They tried to figure out what it would actually cost. Want to know what they found? He wrote some numbers on a board. $93 trillion over 10 years. Now, I'm just a country lawyer, but that's a whole lot of zeros. Kennedy did the arithmetic slowly, showing his work just like a patient teacher. There are about 130 million households in America. $93 trillion divided by 130 million equals, he wrote. $715,385 per household. So that's $715,000 per household over 10 years. That's about $71,500 per year. Every single year, for 10 years. He looked directly at AOC. The median household income in America is about $70,000. So you're asking average families to spend more than their entire annual income, not discretionary income, their total income, just on this one program, before they can buy food, before they pay rent, before they do anything else. You could hear the genuine concern in Kennedy's voice. Young lady, help me understand. If they spend all their money on the Green New Deal, how are they supposed to eat? Before AOC could respond, Kennedy pulled out his phone and connected it to the audio system. But maybe I'm missing something here. Maybe you explained the economics of it better when you were out there promoting this. Let's just watch what you said. He played a video clip of AOC from a January 2019 Instagram Live. The world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change, and your biggest issue is, how are we going to pay for it? This is our World War II. Kennedy paused the video and pulled out a calendar. You said that in January 2019, he noted. Counting slowly on his fingers. So 12 years would be January 2013. That's 6 years from now. He looked at AOC with exaggerated concern. Should I be making plans for Christmas 2030? Or is the world going to end before then? I'm asking seriously, ma'am, because if the world's ending, I need to go tell my grandchildren. Laughter rippled through the gallery. Kennedy's expression, however, remained earnest. I mean, you said it on video. You used it to push your policy. So either you believed the world would literally end, or you were just using fear to manipulate people. Which is it? AOC tried to explain that it was rhetorical, meant to convey urgency. Kennedy just nodded his head slowly. Rhetorical? I see. So when you tell people the world is going to end, they're just supposed to know you don't really mean it. Got it. He then pulled out some campaign finance reports. But here's my favorite part about your Green New Deal. One of the main goals is eliminating fossil fuel vehicles, right? Getting Americans out of their cars and onto public transit, reducing carbon emissions from transportation. Kennedy displayed the FEC filings on the screen. These are your campaign's spending reports from 2018 and 2019. Your headquarters was in Queens, New York. And you want to know how far it was from the subway? He paused for effect. A 1-minute walk, so 60 seconds. I timed it myself on Google Maps. Kennedy began reading from the reports. Campaign spending on Uber and Lyft rides, $29,365. Campaign spending on subway fares, $8,335. He did the math right there on his notepad. That's 3.5 times more money spent on cars than on public transit. And this was while you were telling Americans they need to give up their cars and use public transportation. Your campaign headquarters was a 1-minute walk from the subway, but you spent almost $30,000 on Uber rides. Kennedy looked up. And now you drive a $64,000 Tesla. Do you know where that electricity comes from? About 60% of it is from fossil fuels, from coal and natural gas. So, you're basically still using fossil fuels, just with a few extra steps and a flashy car. He gathered his papers. Young lady, he said, this is what we call do as I say, not as I do. You're out there demanding sacrifice from hardworking families, telling them to give up their cars, to pay $70,000 a year for the Green New Deal, to just live with less. And yet, you're the one taking Ubers everywhere, driving a luxury electric car, and not sacrificing a single thing yourself. Kennedy leaned forward. But hey, maybe I'm being unfair again. After all, you do have a degree in economics from Boston University. That's a fine school. They definitely teach economics there. So, you must surely understand how economies actually work. Let's dig into that economic expertise of yours. Kennedy then pulled out a transcript, AOC's diploma from Boston University, showing her degree in economics and international relations. Now, Boston University, a good school, costs about $60,000 a year. You graduated back in 2011. That's a pretty big investment in your education. And since you got a degree in economics, you really should grasp the basic principles. He then connected his phone to play a few video clips. But then, you go and say things like this. The first clip started to play, showing AOC at a town hall. Unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs. People are working 60, 70, 80 hours a week and can barely even feed their kids. Kennedy stopped the video. Ma'am, that's just not how unemployment is calculated. Unemployment measures the percentage of people who are actively looking for work but can't find any. Whether a person has 1 job or 3, they're counted in the exact same way. And this is literally Economics 101. It's something that's covered in the first couple of weeks of any intro course. He looked genuinely confused. Did they not teach you that at BU? Or did you just miss that class? He played the second clip. This one was of AOC on a podcast. The Pentagon has lost $21 trillion. $21 trillion. Imagine what we could do with all that money. Kennedy just shook his head. The Pentagon didn't lose $21 trillion. That's the entire federal budget for 8 whole years. Just lost it. What really happened were some accounting adjustments, entries that got repeated in different ledgers during the audits. It's just basic accounting. Anybody who's ever balanced a checkbook would understand this. Then came the third clip. It showed AOC being asked how to pay for her proposals. Just pay for it. We paid for World War II. We paid for the moon landing. Just pay for it. Kennedy let that phrase just hang in the air for a moment. Just pay for it. That's not an economic policy, young lady. That's what my 7-year-old granddaughter says when she wants a new toy. She says, "Just buy it, Paw." And I have to explain to her that we actually need money to buy things. She's 7 years old. She's learning. You, with an economics degree, and your answer is, just pay for it. He set the videos aside and pulled out a completely different kind of document, congressional productivity reports. But you know, maybe I'm being too harsh about your grasp of economics. Let's take a look at what you've actually accomplished in Congress. I mean, you've been there for 7 years now, since 2019. That's a pretty decent amount of time. Surely you must have passed some significant legislation by now. And Kennedy then displayed statistics from GovTrack, which is a nonpartisan congressional tracking service. According to GovTrack's analysis, you have introduced the 5th fewest bills compared to your entire New York congressional delegation. The 5th fewest. You are right there at the bottom. You've also joined bipartisan bills, the 6th least, often among all House Democrats. He then pulled up a list of her proposed legislation. You've introduced bills on housing, labor, the environment, immigration. Good topics, all very important issues. But here's the thing. According to GovTrack, most of your legislation has zero activity after it's been introduced. That means they just go nowhere. No committee hearings, no votes, no passage, just a bunch of press releases. Kennedy took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. You see, when I was the Louisiana State Treasurer for 17 years, I had to manage actual budgets and make actual decisions. If I proposed something, but I had to show exactly how it would work, how we were going to pay for it, and what the consequences would be. I couldn't just say, "Trust me," or "Just pay for it." I had real responsibility. He looked over at AOC with what could almost be described as pity. You've been in Congress for 7 years. You're one of its most famous members. You're on television all the time. You have 14 million followers on Instagram. But what have you actually accomplished when it comes to legislation? What major bills have you actually passed? Kennedy didn't even wait for an answer. I'll tell you what you've accomplished. You've made yourself famous. You're very, very good at social media. So let's talk about that. He pulled out yet more statistics. 14 million Instagram followers, 8.9 million on Twitter. You post multiple times a day. We're talking thousands of posts, hundreds of TikTok videos. You are simply everywhere online. Kennedy leaned forward one last time. Young lady, help me understand something here. You somehow have time to make thousands of social media posts, but you don't have time to actually pass legislation. You have time to go to the Met Gala, but you don't have the time to help your own grandmother. You have time for viral videos, but you don't have time to pay your makeup artist. He gathered his papers once more. My generation believed respect was earned through actual accomplishments, not by how many followers you have. We believed you served people by delivering real results, not just by posting Instagram stories. We believed that if you're going to represent people, you should actually be doing something for them. Kennedy's voice then took on a more serious tone. But there's one more thing we need to talk about. Something far more serious than economics or social media. We need to talk about January 6th, 2021. Kennedy's entire demeanor shifted. While his folksy manner was still there, his voice now carried an unmistakable gravity. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, January 6th, was a truly dark day for our country. People lost their lives. Officers were injured while defending the Capitol. It was a grave attack on our democratic institutions, and that's why I have to ask you about the statements you've made regarding that day. He then pulled out her Instagram video from February of 2021. You posted a video where you described your experience. Incredibly emotional, incredibly detailed. Let's just watch a part of it. The video started to play, with AOC recounting her terror, the banging she heard on her door, the yelling, and how she thought she was going to die. And then Kennedy stopped it. That is some harrowing testimony. And with the condition that, if it's true, he pulled out a map of the Capitol complex. Now, let me just show you something here. This right here is the United States Capitol building. He pointed directly to the distinctive dome. This is where you'll find the House chamber. And this is where the Senate meets. This is the place where the breach actually happened on January 6th. He then pointed to a different building on the map. This building is the Cannon House office building. And that is where your office is located. It's about 200 yards away from the Capitol. A completely different building, with a completely different security perimeter. Kennedy then pulled out an official Capitol Police report. So according to the Capitol Police incident reports, which I was able to obtain through official channels, no rioters ever entered the Cannon office building. Not a single one. The security perimeter held strong. That building remained secure for the entire duration of the incident. He then began to read directly from the report. Representative Ocasio-Cortez remained in her Cannon office throughout the incident. Building security was maintained. No unauthorized individuals gained access. Kennedy then looked up from the report. So, when you described hearing that banging on your door and hearing people yelling, "Where is she?" That was actually a Capitol Police officer who was checking on your safety, simply doing his job. But when he announced himself, you interpreted that as a threat. And he then pulled out testimonies from members who were actually inside the Capitol. He mentioned Representative Jason Crow, a former Army Ranger who served in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Crow was in the House chamber when the breach actually occurred. He was physically shielding other members with his own body. He was in real, actual danger. Then there was Representative Andy Kim, who spent hours after the attack helping the janitors clean up all the broken glass and debris. That he was actually there, in the Capitol, both during and after the attack. At this, Kennedy's voice hardened just slightly. But you weren't. You were in an entirely different building. You weren't in any danger, and yet you went on Instagram and described a trauma that you never actually experienced. He then pulled out even more documents, this time fundraising emails that were sent out in the weeks following January 6th, all of them featuring AOC's supposed harrowing experience. And then, you fundraised off of it. These emails went out to millions of people, hard-working Americans who were led to believe that you had survived a violent attack. They donated their money because they genuinely thought you had been through something terrible. Kennedy then read from one of those emails. I thought this was it. I thought I wasn't going to make it. Those were your words, used to raise money. He then pulled out the final figure. Over $3 million. You raised over $3 million using a narrative that you were in grave danger, when, in reality, you were perfectly safe in a completely different building. For the first time in the entire hearing, Kennedy stood up. His full height and commanding presence immediately captured the room's attention. "Young lady, in the military, they have a term for when someone claims combat experience that they don't actually have. They call it stolen valor. And it is one of the most shameful things a person can possibly do. You're claiming a trauma that belongs to other people. You're claiming a courage that you were never required to have." His voice now carried an unmistakable moral authority. The people who were actually in the Capitol that day, the members who sheltered in place together, the officers who fought hand-to-hand with the attackers, and the staff who were barricading doors, they are the ones who experienced real trauma. They are the ones who showed real courage. And yet, you took their story, and you made it all about yourself. Kennedy then gathered up every single document he had presented: the unpaid bills, the campaign finance reports, the legislative record, the Capitol Police reports. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, over this past hour, we've covered quite a lot of ground, but it all tells the very same story. So, Ethan, I think it's about time we had a frank conversation about what that story truly reveals. Kennedy remained standing, and something in his posture signaled that the methodical buildup was finally over. The jury had now heard all the evidence, and now came the verdict. "Young lady, I'm going to be very, very direct with you now. More direct than I have been, because I believe the American people deserve total clarity about what we've all learned here today." He started counting on his fingers. On a signature move viewers knew was the start of a devastating summary. "Point 1, he began, "you built your entire political brand on being a champion for working people. You were a bartender. You told everyone you understand the struggle. That's the story you sold to voters. But the second you got to Congress, the moment you had some money and fame, you completely abandoned those values. You attended a $30,000 party while regular people were struggling. You wore a tax-the-rich dress while you were literally partying with billionaires. And the most damning part? You stiffed working people out of $6,000. We're talking about the makeup artist, the hairstylist, the hotel workers. You made them wait for months. Some even had to threaten legal action just to get the money they were owed. Point 2. You have a degree in economics from Boston University. That's a fine education, I'm sure. But you don't seem to understand the most basic economic principles. You don't even know how unemployment is calculated. That's stuff they teach in the very first week. You proposed a $93 trillion plan with no way to pay for it, other than just saying, "We'll pay for it." You claimed the Pentagon lost $21 trillion, when in reality it was just accounting adjustments. For someone with an economics degree, you appear remarkably clueless about how economics actually works. 8.3. You built your entire reputation on the Green New Deal. You said the world would end in 12 years and demanded that Americans give up their cars, accept a lower standard of living, and make enormous sacrifices. But you yourself made none of those sacrifices. You spent 3 times more of your campaign money on Uber rides than on subway fares, even though your headquarters was just a 1-minute walk from the subway. You drive a $64,000 Tesla that's powered by electricity from fossil fuels. You live in a luxury apartment while telling working families they need to sacrifice. Point 4. You've been in Congress for 7 years now. According to nonpartisan tracking, you've introduced the fewest bills in your delegation, joined bipartisan efforts the least often, and seen most of your proposals go absolutely nowhere. But you have made thousands of social media posts. You might be famous, but you're ineffective. You're great at getting attention, but you're not good at governing. Point 5. You claim to have experienced a trauma that you never actually went through. You said you thought you were going to die on January 6th. But you weren't even in the Capitol building. You were in a completely different building, perfectly safe, with security protecting you. And yet, you took that lie and raised $3 million off of it. You exploited a genuine tragedy, dishonored the people who were actually in danger, and used it all to enrich your own campaign. Kennedy's voice rose just slightly, still controlled, but now carrying an unmistakable conviction. Now, let me tell you something about my generation, young lady. When I was your age, 35 years old, I was clerking for the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. I was learning how the law actually works. Learning that you can't just say things, but you have to be able to back them up. You have to do the work. I spent 17 years as Louisiana's state treasurer, where I managed billions of dollars, had to balance budgets, make payroll, and maintain infrastructure. Every single dollar had to be accounted for. Every single decision had real-world consequences. I couldn't just say, "We'll pay for it later," or "Just trust me," or go post a viral video. I had real responsibility. Kennedy's drawl became more pronounced, and his Louisiana roots clearly showing through. My generation believed that you earned respect through your accomplishments, not through your follower count. You served people through legislation, not by posting Instagram stories. You actually sacrificed for your beliefs. You didn't demand that others make sacrifices while you lived a life of luxury. And you sure as hell didn't lie about being in danger just to raise money. He then walked to the very edge of the platform, looking down at AOC. "So, young lady, you are very talented. You're very good at social media, and you're very good at getting attention. You know how to craft a message, how to work a camera, and how to make yourself famous. In this modern world, those are real skills." Then Kennedy paused. "But governing," he continued, "requires more than that. It requires knowledge, real knowledge, not just slogans. It requires discipline. The discipline to pay your bills, to do your homework, and to follow through. And it requires sacrifice, actually giving up something yourself, instead of just demanding that others do it. And it requires integrity, telling the truth even when it isn't convenient, and serving people even when there are no cameras watching." His voice then dropped to barely above a whisper. But in that silent room, every single word carried weight. And based on everything we've discussed today, every document, every video, every record, I simply haven't seen any evidence of those qualities in you. What I have seen is someone who is very good at performance, but very bad at governance. I've seen someone who preaches sacrifice, but lives a life of luxury. Someone who claims to fight for working people, while at the same time stiffing those very workers. Someone who has an economics degree, but doesn't seem to understand economics at all. And someone who's been in Congress for 7 years, but hasn't really accomplished much of anything, beyond making herself famous. Kennedy straightened up, delivering his final assessment with the full authority of 5 decades in public service. "Young lady, you represent everything that is wrong with modern politics. It was style over substance, performance over results, fame over accomplishment, and social media metrics over actual achievement. You've built a following by telling people what they want to hear, but you haven't done the hard work of actually serving them." He gathered his papers one last time. "I have no further questions." Kennedy sat down, dismissing her with that simple gesture as if she wasn't worth any more of his time. The silent message was devastating. She had been judged, found wanting, and was no longer worthy of his attention. AOC tried to respond, her voice shaking. "Senator Kennedy, you've cherry-picked incidents to create a false narrative." Cherry-picked? Kennedy looked up, genuinely surprised. Ma'am, I'm reading from your own financial disclosures, your own campaign reports, your own videos, your own Instagram posts. These are your words, your actions, your records. I'm just asking you to explain them. She tried again. My record speaks for itself. Yes, ma'am, it does, Kennedy interrupted gently. So that's exactly my point. Your record speaks very clearly. And what it says is that you're more interested in being famous than being effective. More interested in viral videos than in actual legislation. More interested in luxury living than in living your values. The committee chairman intervened, sensing the bloodbath was complete. Senator Kennedy, I think you've made your points. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, you're excused. This committee will take the evidence presented today under advisement regarding potential ethics referrals. As AOC left the witness table, her confident entrance posture was gone. The squad members in the gallery were noticeably quiet. Progressive media looked uncomfortable. Even friendly outlets were furiously typing, unable to ignore the documented evidence Kennedy had presented. Within 2 hours, AOC Exposed was trending on Twitter. In cable news played Kennedy's greatest hits on a loop. That's not how unemployment is calculated. Just pay for it isn't economic policy. You weren't in the Capitol. You stiffed working people. Even liberal commentators struggled to defend her. Look, Kennedy presented documented evidence. Those are her financial records. That is her FEC filing. That is the Capitol Police report. These aren't opinions, they're facts. The squad remained largely silent, offering only generic statements about staying focused on the work, without strongly defending AOC. Progressive leaders privately grumbled that she had become a liability. In her district, community organizers quietly approached potential primary challengers. She's more interested in being famous than representing us. The neighborhood needs actual help, not Instagram posts. Conservative media had a field day. The country lawyer destroys AOC with simple questions. But more damaging were the headlines from moderate outlets. Ocasio-Cortez struggles to explain lifestyle versus rhetoric. Documents show pattern of unpaid bills to workers. Capitol Police contradict AOC's January 6th account. That evening, AOC sat in her Navy Yard apartment, scrolling through the damage on her phone. Her team was in crisis mode. See, we need to change the narrative. Can we get squad members to defend you? Maybe a viral response video? But the problem was simple. Kennedy had used her own words, her own records, her own actions. There was nothing to spin. The facts were the facts. In Washington, D.C., AOC paced her luxury apartment as her team tried to contain the damage. The infinity pool visible through the window seemed to mock her working-class brand. Her phone buzzed constantly with reporters, staffers, and concerned squad members. "We can emphasize your legislative agenda," one aide suggested. "Kennedy already showed she has the fewest bills," another countered. "What about the Green New Deal?" "He showed she spent more on Ubers than the subway. And the world is ending clip is everywhere." AOC threw her phone on the couch. "So what do we do?" Her chief of staff spoke carefully. "Honestly, we ride it out. Keep posting, stay visible, and hope it blows over." But they all knew. In 43 minutes, Kennedy had exposed 7 years of a carefully constructed image. The bartender-turned-congresswoman had been revealed as just another political performer. All style, no substance. She looked at her laptop, at the poll numbers already shifting in her district, at the comments on her Instagram posts, that were suddenly more critical than supportive. She looked at the reality that 14 million followers couldn't protect you from documented facts. In Louisiana, when Senator John Kennedy sat on his back porch in Madisonville, the house, worth maybe $300,000, a fraction of AOC's apartment's value, overlooked a peaceful bayou. He sipped sweet tea and watched the sun set over the water. His wife brought out a plate of dinner. "You were pretty tough on her today." Kennedy nodded slowly. "I was, but somebody needed to be. These folks come to Washington, get a little famous, and forget why they were sent there. Do you think she'll learn? Maybe, maybe not. But perhaps some other young person watching will learn a lesson. They might understand that service is about more than just social media, that representing people means genuinely doing something for them, not simply posting about them." A local news crew from WDSU New Orleans arrived for an interview. Kennedy gestured for them to take a seat on the porch. His wife then brought them some sweet tea. "Senator Kennedy, your questioning today went viral. Millions of views. How do you feel about that?" Kennedy considered the question. "Well, I wasn't aiming to go viral. I was just trying to ask straightforward questions. The kinds of questions any hard-working person would ask. How do you earn a living? Why weren't your bills paid? What have you actually accomplished? Those aren't gotcha questions. They're fundamental questions of accountability. Some are saying you were too harsh, considering her age and experience. I never brought up her gender, her race, or anything personal about her. I spoke about her record, her votes, her spending, and her public statements. That's all fair game. And regarding experience, well, if you plan to propose a complete overhaul of the American economy, you really ought to understand how an economy functions. If you want to represent working people, you had better treat them with respect. Age isn't what matters. So results are what matter. What's the main takeaway you want people to have from today?" Kennedy looked straight into the camera. "I want people to remember that having a lot of social media followers doesn't equate to real accomplishment. Being famous doesn't mean you're effective. And posting about working families isn't the same as actually helping them. My generation learned that you serve people through hard work, by getting results, by actually doing things, not just posting about them." He took a sip of his tea. "That young lady is talented. She's very good with the media. She knows how to connect with people online. But if she truly wants to serve those people, not just entertain or inspire them, but to actually pass laws that will help them, she has to do the real work. Read the bills, build coalitions, make compromises, and pass legislation. That's what governing is. And that's a lot harder than posting a video." The interview wrapped up. As the crew packed up, Kennedy helped carry their gear to the van, asked about their families, and wished them a safe trip. After they drove off, Kennedy returned to his porch. A neighbor strolled by with his dog. The neighbor waved. "Hey, Senator, saw you on the news. You really let that girl have it, huh?" Kennedy waved back. "Just asking questions, Bobby. Oh, just asking questions." He sat there with his wife as darkness fell over the bayou. Meanwhile, somewhere in Washington, AOC was likely scrambling to save her public image. But here in Louisiana, a 73-year-old man who had never chased social media fame sat in peace, confident that he had simply spoken the truth. His wife was the one to break the comfortable silence. "You know what I've always liked about you?" "What's that?" "You've been in politics for 40 years, yet you still live in the same house, still sit on this same porch, and still answer your own door. You've never forgotten where you came from." Kennedy smiled. "Well, that's really the heart of it, isn't it? All those fancy people in Washington, they forget. They get a taste of power, a little money, a bit of fame, and suddenly they forget why they're even there, who they're meant to serve, or what it feels like to struggle with bills, to worry about your kids, or to wonder if you'll have enough to get by. He gestured toward his modest home, his old truck in the driveway, and the quiet neighborhood around them. This is what keeps me honest. It reminds me who I really work for. Not for the people attending $30,000 parties, but for the folks who feel the pain of a $300 bill. They sat quietly for a while, just watching the fireflies dance over the water. In the distance, they heard a church bell ring 7 times. "Do you know?" Kennedy said, his voice thoughtful. "That young lady has a choice to make now. She can either double down on the performance art. That means more viral videos, more manufactured outrage, more noise. Or she can decide to actually learn something, to do the hard work, and to genuinely serve people instead of just posting about it. Which path do you think she'll choose?" Kennedy chuckled softly. "Well, if I were a betting man, which I'm not, mind you, I'd say she'll probably keep doing what's gotten her this far. Fame is an addictive thing. All those followers, that constant attention, that feeling of being important, that's a hard thing to give up." He stood up, stretched, and looked out over his hometown one last time. "But hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she'll surprise me. Perhaps she'll decide that being effective is more important than being famous, that serving people matters more than entertaining them, and that getting results is more valuable than getting retweets." He opened the screen door for his wife. "And if she does end up learning that lesson, well, that might just be the best thing to come out of today's hearing. It wouldn't just be about exposing what's wrong, but about helping someone find their way to what's right." The two of them went inside to have a simple dinner. There were no cameras, no followers, and no viral moments, just an honest life. It's lived honestly in service to people who valued results more than rhetoric. The former bartender had learned that Instagram likes are no preparation for a Louisiana cross-examination. The man from Oxford had taught a masterclass in substance over style, and somewhere in the world, 14 million followers were coming to realize that fame without substance is, ultimately, just